everyone, I'm Ashley Cannon Newell and welcome to Paper Tray Inc.'s Stamp-a-faire event. For this video tutorial, I have selected entry number 22, which was designed by Magdalene Yeo. This beautiful card I was inspired by it, and I wanted to see what I could create to just give it a little bit something more as she submitted it to see what I could do. So here are three different cards I designed from three different standpoints on how she or anybody else can just add a little bit something more to this card design. Okay, so to get started, I used the basic supplies that Magdalene used, which is Rosie Posy stamp set and Love and Marriage stamp set. I also used the Rosie Posy coordinating dies, which is what she used. I already have here die cut the Rosie Posy flowers, and I'm just going to put my stamp on my acrylic block, and I'm inking it up in berry sorbet ink. The first technique I want to share with you is, I'm going to call it pop it out. So you have the stamp set, and if you have coordinating dies, to do something different, use foam adhesive to pop it off from your card and give it some depth and some height. And so first step I'm going to do here is stamp the images directly onto the coordinating die cuts. I'm using rustic cream cardstock here, and I'm stamping it with berry sorbet ink so you can also be able to see the images very well. This is a little bit different from how Magdalene designed her particular cards and die cuts. I believe she used pure poppy cardstock, and she may have either used pure poppy ink for a tone on tone look, or she embossed it or used a Versamark or a watermark ink. So that's one thing I'm doing differently, is using a color on a contrasting color. And so normally a white base is cool because you can see the edges of the die cut around it. So now at this point I'm stamping the leaves and on the coordinating die cuts with simply chartreuse ink, and I'm using a small leaf and a large leaf just like I did the roses, a small rose and a large rose, and just lining them up on the die cut and then stamping, inking them up and stamping down, making sure I get good coverage. Okay, now that I have all of my die cuts, I'm going to be taking a Copic marker. This is a red color. It's called lipstick red. It's R29, and I use the fine point part, and I'm just coloring upwards to add some shadowing basically, and this will add some dimension. This is probably one of the biggest things I would suggest for Magdalene to do in order to add just a little bit something to her card, is to add some shadowing either with Copic markers or colored pencils with a color that will make it pop. And you can see right here, this changed the actual stamped image completely. So that's definitely a huge way to step it up and give your card a little bit something more by adding the coloring, the shadowing, and the shading to create that shadow look on the stamped die cuts. It makes it so it doesn't look as flat, gives it some dimension, and it also gives it a couple of colors. Since I stamped it with berry sorbet and I'm using this bright red, it's giving that dimension. So I'm going to also do the same thing on the leaves. For the leaves, I'm using a Copic marker G24, and the color name is Willow. I'm just really freehanding everything here, not stressing out at all on making sure I'm getting it all perfectly. I did test it out one time before. I actually did it on my project die cuts, just stamping it on scrap paper and then using my Copic markers there. So if you want to practice first, I suggest practice on scrap paper. Just stamp your image and then just do your coloring there. Here I have rustic cream cardstock. It is cut to about 4 inches, about 5¼ inches wide and 4 inches long. And I have my Love and Marriage stamp set, and I'm using the same sentiment Magdalene used, which is Together Forever from that set. I'm inking it up in true black ink, and I'm going to go ahead and stamp it directly onto the lower right area of the rustic cream cardstock, very similar to the layout that Magdalene did. Okay, so to continue on with my theme on how to add a little bit something, pop it out, I'm using a lot of pop dots or foam adhesive for these particular die cuts. So I'm going to arrange my die cuts first without using adhesive so I have a general idea on where I want to place everything. So I do this without any adhesive, play around with it, and just push my leaves around and move my flowers just to make sure that I get everything placed just right. Okay. So I didn't want it too close to that sentiment there. And I really like to have an overhang off of my, for my die cuts. It's just a personal preference. You don't have to. I know some people like to be able to send their cards without having to use oversized envelopes or things like that. So if you don't want it to overhang, you can shift it a little bit more, the whole concept to the right, because there is some space that I have to work with to the right. As you can see, the sentiment is not all the way at the end. So I'm adding foam adhesive. I'm adding 3 to the large flower, removing the backing. And for those leaves, all I did was I took my adhesive and just glued them down there. So I'm taking the small one, and again, just moving it around to make sure I place it exactly where I want to first. Okay, so now I'm just going to start putting foam adhesive on my second smaller rose here. And I'm going to see about placing it here. And it's a little bit flat. So what I'm going to do is show you a little trick that I really like to use. I double up my foam adhesive. So and this gives you a little bit more height. So I'm going to need to remove that backing, and then I can place it here, and it pops off beautifully off of the rose that's already popped off there. Okay, so one last thing here. I'm going to go ahead and take my card base, which is pure poppy. It is 5.5 inches by 4.25 inches, an A2 card. I'm just going to add adhesive to the back of my focal point here and just center it directly onto that card front so you can see the border along the edges. And this is very similar to what Magdalene, I hope I'm saying your name right, did to her card. And I'm just using my fingers to flip up those die cuts. And to make sure that they stay secure, popped up, I'm adding more foam adhesive to those as well, since I didn't add that in the very beginning, but I want to make sure that I pop them up at the right position. Okay, so just use your fingers to flip up those die cuts. Don't be afraid to clean up that cardstock. And this is just one way to pop it out. Use those die cuts to create that depth and dimension. Okay, moving on to my second way that Magdalene can just do something different to her card design. This one I'm just going to call flatten it out. So the first one was pop it out. This is flatten it out. This is for those who like to create one layer cards and are very into sending flat cards in the mail, things like that. So you don't have to use your die cuts in order to create that dimension or create a beautiful card design. I'm using the same layout, the same concept, and I'm showing just how you can just stamp directly onto your card focal point to create your floral pattern design and achieve similar results. So I stamped the roses, the large and the small, with berry sorbet ink, and I'm stamping the leaves with simply chartreuse ink, the same ink colors from the first project. And I just overlap a little bit. And now I'm taking the smaller leaf image. It's really the medium size one in the set. And I'm just going to stamp off the paper here a little bit. Now I'm taking the sentiment from Love and Marriage and inked it up in True Black. And I'm going to overlap it of that rose a little bit. And all my stamping is done. So now I'm using the same technique that I used in the first card design. I'm using my Copic marker again to just basically color around the edges and the center little parts so you can create shadows and dimension and actual color contrast basically with that berry sorbet with the red Copic marker. It really makes a big difference from the transformations you can see from just stamping it and having it be just the stamped images with the inks and then adding the Copic marker shadowing to create that contrast, even on a one-layer card design here. Again, don't stress out doing this part, have fun, and just shade away. Do the same thing on the leaf. I'm just going to color right here in the center. And my last step here is to get my card base, which is an A2 size Pure Poppy cardstock. And again, do the same thing, center it in the middle. And so this is another way you can just add a little something. Again, is using the Copic markers. But on this card design, it is a one-layer card design. So it's just sharing a different way to make the same concept and make it look slightly different. There's your one-layer card. Same card design, very inspired by Magdalene's project. Okay, so my third way to add just a little bit something to Magdalene's design is to go all out. Okay, so the first card was pop it out. The second card was flatten it out. And the third card now is go all out. So what I'm going to do is go all out, add extra things to this card design that Magdalene did not have on hers, but using pretty much the same supplies. This is the hexagon border or background stamp from the Rosy Posy set. I am inking it up in fine linen ink, and this is russet cream cardstock. And I'm just going to line it all up here, make sure I have it lined up and decide which side I want to stamp it on. And go ahead and stamp. I'm just going to just go down a little bit. I'm not going to do the entire card front. So I think I'm going to ink it up one more time. Okay, now I have the center coordinating hexagon stamp here from Rosy Posy. I'm going to ink it up in fine linen again and stamp the insides, that little solid portion of that hexagon in the center. I'm going to do that on all 3 rows. Okay, now that I have my hexagon pattern all stamped, I already have my Rosy Posy die cuts here all stamped and even Copic marker colored just to save a little bit of time on this video. But as you can see, it's the same technique that I use with the color and the Copic markers. So right now what I'm doing is doing the same thing that I did on the other cards, figuring out the placement of my die cuts and trying to figure out where I'm going to add my sentiment and what else am I going to do with the actual card design to go all out. Okay, so what I've decided to do is I'm going to take the Rosy Posy stamp set and see that little dot there? I'm going to use it to make a polka dotted background. So I'm going to get my acrylic block here, have my dot on here, and I'm going to be using Pure Poppy ink and randomly stamp polka dots. Really, really fun to do, very, very quick. They do not have to be uniform or anything like that. Very random and super fun. Okay, so I'm going to pick this up and I'm going to get out my berry sorbet ink to coordinate with that flower there, those flowers. Use the same dot stamp and then go in between the pure poppy dots. And this is going to create that little bit of a background pattern here. Very random and interesting. Okay, I think that's enough. All right, so now what I'm going to do is, again, see about the placement of this, because now I have my pattern. I need to see how it looks, these die cuts look with my patterns all stamped. And I see here, okay, well, I don't want to put my sentiment necessarily over the polka dots. I think it'll get lost in that area due to the random pattern and actually the colors. So I'd rather go up here and stamp this sentiment on top of the hexagon pattern because it is a lighter ink and the pattern is not so busy, and I'm using black ink on top of the fine linen. So I think this will work so much better. So now that I have that stamped, I'll just take a look to see how that looks. And now I've decided what I want to do is to continue my go all out concept or theme on this card. I'm going to go ahead and take this over to my sewing machine and stitch around the edges. Okay, so I'm going to just take my fingers and distress the edges with my fingernail along that border there. And I've already stitched around the edge there. So very easy to do. Now I'm just going to take my foam adhesive and pretty much add them to the back of all of these die cuts and pop them up to give them lots of dimension for this particular card design. Still playing with the idea of where to place some of these leaves and how I'm going to do the flowers exactly, but this is something that you can easily do and just play with for a while to figure it out and not really rush that part because you can get an idea of what looks natural to the actual flowers. So I think I want the leaves to hang off here and I want them to overlap on this left side of the card focal point. So I'm just adding adhesive just to get it started so those leaves won't move. All right, so now I'm taking my foam adhesive. I'm going to add 3 to the back of the large flower again. Remove the backing. Use my smaller rows here and make sure I get that placement right again. All right, and now take a couple more because I want it raised above the larger rows. Stack them together, those 2 foam adhesive or pop dots, and then place it down. All right, so this design is done. I'm just going to add some adhesive to the back here and add it to my Pure Poppy A2 card base. And I want it centered. So I have it centered here. And it looks like my measurement is off a little bit. So to make this even, I'm just going to pull this up really quick. Pull it all the way up to the top, adhere it, and I'm just going to take it over to my little trimmer and then trim off some of the bottom here so I can make sure all the sides are even. So here is just a little bit of how I have recovered from what I think is a mistake on my part on measuring my focal point, but the card still works perfectly fine. It may not be a perfect A2 size card, but it definitely will fit in an A2 envelope because I even trimmed it down. So again, use your fingers, flip up those die cuts a little bit on the edges, curl them up, make them look real, and make them come to life. Adding foam adhesive now underneath of these leaves just so that they will stay in place. Don't be afraid to curl those up and see what you can do with those die cuts. So here are all of my cards I created for this first aid stampers project. The first one is pop it out, the second one flatten it out, and the third one go all out. 3 different ways that Magdalene could add just a little bit of something using Copic markers, die cuts, or just stamping one layer cards even to achieve just a little bit something different from what she created. For Paper Tray Ink, I'm Ashley Cannon Newell.